Welcome everyone to the 5 Tips and Tricks for Careers in Athletics. I am your host, Dr. Maureen Mosovitz, with the all-time most favorite, wonderful co-host, Jen Albanese. Welcome, Jen.
Hello, sir. How are you today?
Great. We are very fortunate to have someone on tonight.
Yes.
Her own podcast, Hear Her Sports. Elizabeth, who has been a cyclist, and now she interviews all types of female athletes, which are really cool. So great things, I think, coming up with her interview today.
Yeah, looking forward to that a lot. She, on her podcast, she always highlights female athletes and females in the sports industry. So it's a really cool podcast if you get a chance to check it out. And there's so many, obviously, females in sports right now
even before.
A hot topic. I know. We were talking a little bit before.
I know. Every time I think of female athletes, I think of my sister and Nadia Comaneci. She was obsessed, with gym. Well, she always loved gymnastics, but that was the pinnacle of.
Oh yeah, I mean,
what she would look at, and so when I was little, it was gymnastics and US. I mean, Nadia wasn't US gymnastics, but even some of the amazing US gymnastics teams
Yeah, I mean, every little girl wanted to be a US gymnast after 1996 with Carrie Strug, and she stuck the landing and they won the gold medal.
She had on one foot, right?
On one foot. Yeah. I mean, and it still has continued. I mean, the US dominance in gymnastics has been, there's so many. We were talking Shawn Johnson and Nastia Liukin and obviously Simone Biles and Jordan Childs and all these phenomenal, every little girl wants to be a gymnast, I feel like. So that's something that I remember too. But then you think about the US soccer team.
Yeah, the World Cup when they won.
World Cup.
It'll just kind of be ingrained.
I won't do what Brandi Chastain did, but when she scored, and Mia Hamm, you think about those female athletes, paved the way for so
I was
many
thinking,
other.
Of tennis, and you have some of the most amazing women, just incredible.
Serena and Venus.
That's when we were kids. That was what was happening when you were coming up. Is here are these two amazing young women that are just
sisters on top
sisters.
of it.
It was you have this story that's historic that's happening, and then now you have them just have dominated the tennis world. So
and just record holders, and Serena especially doing it when she was pregnant, and being a mom and an athlete and coming back from having a kid. That's
Serena probably is one of the top tennis players of all time. This has to be by far
unbelievable, just to be able to say we saw her compete,
and that was
incredible.
Our generation watching her come up and be successful, and then the two of them doubles, and you just watch international tennis just to sometimes see them.
Yeah, exactly. They brought so much attention to the sport, and I think that's kind of from a female perspective, that's what you gravitate towards. And you think about
I'm thinking our kids now, Caitlin Clark is probably going to be that for them now is okay, here's this phenomenal woman that's doing crazy things, and it's just so great that they've been able to see her, see what's going on, and see success for the US, but also on a high level. It's incredible.
Yeah, just on a professional level for women in sports, to see the WNBA getting the attention that, because I remember when the WNBA started, you know what I mean? And it was, it takes time, but to see the impact that now one player has had is just incredible. And it's kind of infiltrating to all the other, women's college basketball, and which is great. And I love to see that, because we both have daughters. We want them to be able to look up to role models in sports. In women in sports and every level. And they don't have to play basketball, or they don't have to play soccer either. There's female role models in all the different sports. So it's crazy to think back, all the ones that have been such, we have grown up with and had gotten that impact, so.
Absolutely.
Really
and our
cool.
guest today is interviewing those women that are out there. So we can't wait to have Elizabeth Emery come back after this break, and we'll have everyone hear her soon.
Are you a loyal 5 Tips and Tricks podcast listener? If not, now is the time to start. Get all your info and fun content on the podcast by following us on all our social channels at @AthCareerPod. The 5 Tips and Tricks podcast is a part of Athletic Career Consulting. Make sure to reach out to us. The one-stop shop for everything is our website, www.athcareer.com. Remember, follow and like us on @AthCareerPod, rate and review us, and get all your info at www.athcareer.com. Okay, welcome back, everybody. Maury, would you like to introduce our guest today?
Absolutely. We're about to dive into a conversation with someone whose passion for sport and female athletes is absolutely contagious. Her background as a former professional athlete has shaped her deep understanding and appreciation for the dedication it takes to excel at the highest level. In the 90s, she raced bicycles professionally, competing all over the world. She's won prestigious titles, including the U.S. Time Trials National Championship, a gold medal at the Pan American Games, and Tour of Japan. She's raced in the Tour de France, known back then as the Grand Boucle, and was represented Team USA in multiple world championships. Now through her podcast, Hear Her Sports, she brings us closer to the voices of incredible athletes sharing their inspirational journeys with audiences around the globe. So get ready for some incredibly great tips and tricks from Elizabeth Emery. Welcome, Elizabeth.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Hi,
great to be here.
Elizabeth. Welcome.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's nice to get to know you. We saw your information online and all the wonderful things you're doing, featuring amazing women in sports and athletics. And we just wanted to have you on and share some of the knowledge that you have for those people that not only are interested in, interviewing and talking to people in the world of sports, but also your professional experience in cycling. So, yeah.
Well, I really appreciate being on. And, I love the idea of your podcast that you have these, like the name is Tips and Tricks, because I always feel like my guests have so many tips and tricks. I feel like it should have been in my name, because I don't think people realize, what all my guests offer.
Yeah, there's just such a breadth of what people have to contribute to you and their experiences and what you're asking of them. So definitely we'd recommend people check it out. We were just talking about, we know someone who you work closely that was featured. So, awesome guests, people that we've known personally. So we're enjoying hearing that. So not to hold you back, but let's get started on your first tip or trick.
Sure. I have a wide-ranging group of tips and tricks, but the first one is, and most of these are from having talked to so many active women, and the guests on the show are both athletes, but they're also, coaches and nutritionists, all that. Anyway, so my first tip is be active now. And I'm lucky. I enjoy being outside. I enjoy being active, but I certainly don't like doing that every single day. I mean, even yesterday I went for a bike ride. It felt glorious because it was in the 40s, not in the teens, but it was in the 40s. It's not warm. And so it wasn't super great, but I love riding my bike, and that's why it was good. And so I think it's important. And what I found from my guests is a lot of them have gone through so many different sports when they were a kid until they found that sport that they love. And it's like falling in love. And that's what it was like for me when I found cycling. I couldn't get enough of it. All I did was hang out with cyclists and go for bike rides and talk about bike riding. And, I think a lot of women, because there isn't a ton of representation or, in history, there hasn't been a ton of representation of women in sports in the media. For example, when I was a kid, it was skating and it was gymnastics and swimming and, maybe some tennis. But, there wasn't rugby. There wasn't mountain biking. There wasn't, there wasn't yoga and all this different kind of sports. And so I think often women try the stuff that is available to them, like basketball in school or whatever it is. And they say, oh, I can't do that. I'm not athletic, when in fact they just haven't found their right sport. So I really encourage people to keep trying sports. And I say that because being active is so important. It's not just about exercise. It's about being healthy long term. It's being able to carry your groceries when you're 70s and 80s. It's about having a good life for a long time. And it's not just physically, it's mentally. All the research shows that physical activity helps your brain, and there is an actual connection between those two. And I said be active now because recently a friend of mine said, when I retire, I'm going to become active. And I thought, whoa,
don't wait till then.
Don't wait too long.
Right. Don't wait too long. And especially things like, all the research is showing strength training is so important to start long before you retire.
Right.
So I really encourage everybody to.
What moving. A good tip. I mean, I know I was kind of dormant, not that I was ever an athlete like yourself, but I would struggle. My background is actually I was a student manager, and I loved working with people that were involved with athletics, and I'd try and work out with them, but wasn't really consistent. And now, in my late 30s, into my 40s right now, someone said, hey, you really should. And I've now made it a goal that every day I'm going to do some activity, get my heart rate up. And I can feel it when I'm at work, the difference between days that I'm able to really get a decent workout in and not. And it's a great tip to just stay active, be involved. It means much more than just, like you said, not just your body health, but your mental health.
Yeah. And it doesn't have to be, exercise with a capital E or, sport with a capital S. It's just, like go for a walk, go for a hike, whatever it is. There's tons of different activities that you can do that are fun.
Well, I'm definitely not riding my bike like you did. I were in my basement, and it's not the same level, probably.
It's all good.
And I always say, Maurice, at least we're doing something, and I think
exactly
like that mental part of it too. It's like you feel accomplished if you do it, and then you feel like you can tackle another task if you do it. So that's a really, really good one, and that can help you get better at your job too when you're taking care of yourself physically and mentally. So
and also, it's interesting that we all compare ourselves to the pro athletes when they're not that healthy. To be honest, they're doing a lot of things that we probably don't want to emulate.
You're burning yourself out way probably more than you expected. So
exactly.
Well, awesome tip, great start. Let's get in your second one.
Okay, so my second one is call yourself an athlete, and this is for women. And for some reason, this issue is cropping up again, and I have no idea why. Maybe you guys have hypothesis, but when I started Hear Her Sports in 2016, a huge percentage of my guests were reluctant to call themselves athlete, actively saying like, no, I'm not an athlete. And you guys have mentioned that you've looked at my athlete list, my guest list, and they're all athletes. I mean,
100% all athletes.
Right, exactly.
Absolutely, yeah.
But here we are still in 2025, and there's a stigma for women to call themselves athletes, to be athletic, to be feminine enough. There's still a fear for lifting heavy and getting bulky, which, is really not a thing for most people, or being too big or being too aggressive. So, it's really strange for me. I've never really understood it. However, I will reveal a little personal history is that I did this myself. When I won the national championships, I remember very specifically saying to the press, now I am an athlete. And that's sort of like, I was implying that I went from riding a tricycle to winning the national championships, which obviously is not true. There was a lot of stuff that happened between those two things.
Yeah.
And I think maybe my hypothesis is that we've heard that study that women need to satisfy all 10 requirements of a job application, and men will do it if they, satisfy one. So I think maybe women feel like they have to achieve some noticeable, like really obvious, grand thing before they can call themselves an athlete. I have interviewed Dr. Stacy Sims, who wrote Roar and Next Level. She's been on the podcast. And she said, if you exercise intentionally, you're an athlete. And I think we all have to embrace that.
Let's go. We're all athletes.
We're all athletes.
Well, there's I think for women, there's the stigma of everything. You have to be perfect at everything or you're not, you know what I mean? You have to be a perfect mom. You have to be perfect at the job. If you want to be an athlete, you have to be perfect at that. You have to excel at the highest level to call yourself an athlete. If you're not, on a team or playing in a professional league, you're not an athlete. You're not perfect. So there's always those, I think, unrealistic goals that women set for themselves. And they just think, okay, well, I'm never going to reach those, so that's why I'm not an athlete,
Right.
So, which I wish people wouldn't think, but I think that's just kind of the thought process of women. I mean, I've fallen into that as well with everything, in
Yeah, me
life,
too.
but
Yeah.
it's good to be reminded of that.
Yeah. And I also want people to embrace the fun of being an athlete. It's not all serious. And again, not exercise with a capital E.
Yeah,
Oh,
I like
awesome.
to say I like to say, Maury, like when we go golfing, I'm not on the LPGA tour here. This is just for fun. This is just for fun here, okay?
Well, I'm definitely not anywhere near the any tour and anywhere. So I appreciate anyone that's putting in any effort, and it's so great, and appreciating so many people that have been on the podcast and women that are declaring themselves athletes, that are declaring themselves professionals in sports. Jen has talked about it. We were recently listening to an episode of one of our guest who was talking about being a mother in sport and being a coach and what that means for her, and just embracing what that is. And it's so great that you're sharing that with the community that's listening to your podcast and people that are getting involved. So what a great tip. Awesome.
Like I said, it's good to be reminded of that, because I think women need to be reminded of that. So that's a good one.
Awesome. Number 3. We're on number 3.
Yes, we're on number 3.
Number 3.
Yep.
And this is in relation to starting the podcast, and it is just start. When I spent literally a year preparing for to start the podcast, to launch the podcast, and I'm really proud of that time, because I figured out how to actually do a podcast, and figured out my look and all that stuff. But I could have prepared for another year, probably 3 years. But I set a deadline for myself, and I'm so glad I did, because you're never going to, it goes back to the perfect thing. We're never going to be perfect. And luckily I discovered a video by Ira Glass, and it's called The Gap. And I don't know if you guys have heard it. But
no, but I love Ira Glass. I'm going to try it out.
Yeah. And it's really beautiful. And his basic premise is that for creatives, there's this huge gap between what we envision that we want to make and what we actually are capable of making, because we're not there yet.
Right.
And at the beginning, that gap is enormous. And we often get dissuaded from actually doing something because we get discouraged. But really what we need to do is just keep on doing it a lot.
Right.
And definitely go look at the video. That should be my tip. Go look at the video.
Well,
but like by doing it a lot, the skill rises. And that's actually what happened, of course, is I get better at editing. I got better at interviewing. I got better at being able to listen to my guest and actually think at the same time. And anyway, it was crucial for me to make those decisions, but it was also I was very glad that I actually started.
Awesome. I'm going to go watch now. That's one thing I have not seen yet. So that's adding it to my list of things to do. But yeah, like making that jump, and that's kind of in a lot of things, podcasting for sure. We can definitely attest to that too. Like we were like, okay, we're going to jump and take the leap. And, it's been awesome. But, in any of these endeavors and careers in sports, a lot of people are afraid, like, we were talking about, am I capable to do some of these things? And sometimes you got to take that leap. And in podcasting, that's for sure, because it's not something that just comes naturally, I think, to anybody. And then in the world of just working in the sports life and doing these things, whether it's being competitive in cycling, I'm sure at that first part you were like, okay, what am I doing on my first race? And then you're winning championships.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think you're right. Just when you start something, that's when you learn the most, is when you actually keep doing it. Like, obviously, it's so funny. We go back and listen to a couple of our first episodes and we're like, oh gosh, we sound so bad. And like now I feel like we sound a little bit better, like, because we've done this more. But it's just like in my regular day job, like calling a game. Like the first time I called a game, it was probably rough. And now I've done it for a few years, 4 or 5 years now at the highest level, doing, D1 football. Like, it's gotten better, and I think I've done better. So it's, you're afraid to actually do it, but once you do it, that's when you learn and get better.
So. Oh, totally. I do think that I was also glad that I made little rules for myself. For example, I made a rule that it had to come out on every other Thursday at 4:30 in the morning. Yeah. And there were some very, very long nights, but it got done because I had that rule. And I think that's also important, is establishing some sort of guidelines.
Yeah, for sure.
No, we try and stay ahead of guests. We try and make sure that we're like, if you don't keep yourself organized, and luckily Jen and I are pretty good at that from just mean, the world of working in athletics in any form, whether you're an athlete or like you have to create some boundaries and goals for yourself, or it's not possible. But this has showed us that you need to do that like times 10 sometimes.
Yeah. Thank God we're organized people. Because
Yeah.
we got a nice little schedule going. So we got to keep that straight sometimes. It gets tough. So
I talk about confidence on the podcast all the time. And this sort of relates to confidence in that, like for me, real confidence is knowing that you'll be able to figure it out, even if you don't know it when you like head into it, but knowing that you have it together enough to figure it out.
Yeah. You got to believe in yourself and make it happen.
Right.
That I can figure out how to put the equipment up was my big, like, I was really proud of myself. I'm like, okay, this works. So the little things.
Awesome. Well, great tip and trick. What are we on, Jen? Number 4. I got to keep me on task.
We are cruising. We are doing great.
So this is definitely one of the lessons I learned from my podcast, and it's 99% of my guests. 99% of my guests have had that one person. And by that, I mean they have had that one person who has told them with words coming out of their mouths in a very serious way that you can do it. You can be successful. You can go to the Olympics. You can be a world champion. And so there are 2 parts to this tip is one, look for that person for yourself. Find that person that can tell you how great you are, because we all need that sometimes. And then on the other side of that, do it for other people. Like when I'm mentoring kids and volunteering at squash where I volunteer, if I see anything that's excellent, I always tell them, because it makes such a difference.
Oh, that's awesome. I think Jen and I talk all the time about mentoring and, have had so many guests that have shown like what the benefit is. And when you can connect with someone and help them get to the next level of what they're trying to accomplish, whether that be professionally or competitively, what a great experience on both sides for those who are involved. So
it's very
rewarding.
So
little.
Yeah.
Yes. So little.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is very rewarding. And I think, Maury and I talked too about the people that have influenced us and impacted us and been those people for us. We've been lucky to have some of those folks on the podcast. And it was our opportunity to almost like thank them, like, hey, you were the mentor that I needed. And you gave me the guidance that I needed and, told me the truth and pushed me to do better, even though it might've been hard for me to hear at the time. Like, you made me a better person, better at my job. And that is great to be able to have that person in your life, like you said. So finding that person is really important, but then being that person, like hopefully this podcast can be that for some people to kind of give them those guidelines and those tips to kind of keep moving, in this field if that's where they want to be. So,
yeah.
So when you were in the world of cycling, did you have that person that helped get you to like be motivated? Like, how did that work out when you were in that realm?
Yeah.
Let's see. Did I have, when I first started bike racing, I was in New York City and I was part of the Century Road Club Association, which is a racing club. And the whole club was just incredibly supportive. And yes, I had a coach there who was shout out to Lance. He was really amazing. And Lisa. So yes, very much.
And those people are the ones that like come to memory, like right away. I can think of those mentors that I've had in my life. And, you always aspire to hopefully be that for someone else too. So what a great tip.
Yeah.
So
That's
awesome.
So good.
Okay, Jen, we're going to bring it home. Final one. Ask that question.
Yep. So the last one. So what do you know now that you wish you knew then? So what do you know now at this point in your life and career that you wish you knew when you first started on this journey?
I'll have to admit, I really had trouble with this question because the only thing that kept coming up is I wish I knew how much work it would have been. But on the other hand, I'm glad I didn't know how much work it was going to be.
It's like a catch-22.
Exactly. And, I would never have started it. And it has totally taken over my life. It takes over my day, but it has also completely changed me, made me a better person. And I'm so glad. I'm so glad I didn't know.
The things that you do not know that do not hurt you or help you actually in the end.
Yes.
Ignorance is bliss sometimes, but that hard work piece, I think people don't realize that it really does take a lot of work, whether you are starting a podcast or starting in a career or being an athlete. Like, it takes time and effort and discipline and really putting forth that effort. And it's not just handed to you. Like, no athlete is ever successful if it's never been just handed to them. So understanding that, I think, is really good. And then, kind of being able to look back and be like, yeah, it was a lot of work, but it was worth it. It was worth everything that I put into it to get that, which is great. So
also, you never know where something is going to go. I mean, when I first started the podcast, I thought, I'm just going to talk to some women about sports. And, it has allowed me to talk about equity and so many different things like economics and coaching and, supporting others and mentorship and nutrition. And, like, I would never have known that was where it was going to lead.
All those journeys you
just
didn't
never
know.
Yeah. And then you learn so much too from those conversations and connections that you make, and you're getting that message out to a broader audience who might not know it either. So I think that's awesome too. Right. So as long as you're still learning, I love doing that. That's what we've been doing on this podcast, just learning new things.
Just learning every time.
Well, you guys are in academics, so in the academic arena anyway.
World,
so,
yes.
Of course, yes.
Yeah.
Sometimes it doesn't always feel like learning, though. Sometimes it feels like right now in sports, it's hard because everything is pushing away that you forget that it's an educational environment, but you keep grounding yourself back into that and do it. But you're right. The nice part is being around young people who, in their own way, even though there's these, changing landscape of sports, they're still thirsty to kind of learn and grow and
start their life and start their careers and their journeys. Like, they're just starting.
Be competitive. It's a fun environment. Yeah. Well, Elizabeth, thank you so much for your time. We look forward to seeing all the wonderful women you bring on your podcast in the future. And we appreciate you sharing your thoughts with our fans. So thank you.
No, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. I appreciate your podcast.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
This has been great. Thank you. And thanks for listening, everybody. I know, Maury, I'll throw out the socials.
Do it.
So make sure you follow us on all of your social channels and podcast platforms at Ath Career Pod. And make sure you follow Elizabeth and her podcast as well. We'll link that up in our socials. So this has been great. And thank you so much for taking the time. It was great to talk with you.
See you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
If you like the 5 Tips and Tricks podcast, make sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. You can rate and review us, including questions that may be answered on future episodes. The 5 Tips and Tricks podcast for careers in athletics is part of Athletic Career Consulting. Check us out at www.athcareer.com. Don't forget to follow and like us on your top social media platforms.